So let's go ahead and get started. The Zoom is on. People on the internet sphere can hear okay. I'll take that as a yes. My name is Will Hedberg. I'm an associate professor of Japanese in Silk and the associate director for the Asia Center at ASU. And it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to our ongoing lecture series, now in its third year. Global Asia in a Multipolar World, a series that invites prominent scholars from an array of disciplines in the humanities, arts, social sciences to speak about connections across Asia, broadly defined, flows of texts, people, goods, ideas, languages, ideas. Our speaker today really needs no introduction, both because I think most people in the room are very familiar with his work.
Because I saw you last week.
And because some of us saw him last week, because he is our neighbor to the immediate south, who's been very active and supportive of ASU initiatives and Asian studies in Arizona more generally. So it's really a pleasure to have him come up and talk about his work. Professor Scott Gregory is a scholar of Chinese literature with an emphasis on late imperial Chinese fiction and drama, and especially its intersection with the culture of print. His book, Bandits in Print, The Water Margin and Transformations of the Chinese Novel, was published last year from Cornell University Press, and he has published extensively on an array of topics dealing with late imperial Chinese fiction, fiction commentary, print history, and Buddhism. He's currently involved in a translation of the Chinese novel Xiangji, Journey to the Western Ocean.
Yeah, Journey to the
really
Western Ocean.
fascinating, if lesser known Chinese novel that I know a lot of us are excited to see in translation. Professor Gregory obtained his PhD from Princeton in 2012. Before that, he spent time teaching at the National University of Singapore, spent extensive time in Taipei, Kyoto, and numerous other places. And he's also the co-director of the Title VI National Resource Center, along with Dr. Wenhao Diao at the University of Arizona. So we're really delighted to have Professor Gregory up here again. Looking very forward to his presentation today, Learning from the Bandits.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for that overly kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be up here. So I, as Dr. Hedberg said, it's been almost a year now, I guess, but the book just came out in April. And it's also available as a free download as an open access publication. In case you're interested in that, I'll give you the information to download it later. And as Dr. Hedberg said, it's about the 16th century novel, The Water Margin, aka The Outlaws of the Marsh, in several of its different incarnations in print. And I think probably many of you are familiar with The Water Margin already. What motivated me to study it is it's really a strange book and it's hard to pin down. It's even the basic facts of its plot are difficult to describe because depending on the edition that somebody comes across or came across in late imperial, early modern China, it could be quite different. It could even impute different meanings depending on which different edition you happened upon. So I was trying to, kind of get my head around that a little bit. And I found the only way to really do that was to look at individual instantiations of the novel in print, to really ground them as much as possible into particular communities of readers and producers. As specifically as possible. So there we go. I wanted to give you a little overview of what the book is about. And I'll tell you, I want to concentrate on the first half of the book, really, in this talk, because the rest, if you're really interested, you can download it. It's free. You can download it yourself. So in the first couple chapters, I talk about elite editions of The Water Margin. When we talk about Ming and Qing fiction like The Water Margin, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Journey to the West, a lot of the times we think about we think of it as so-called popular culture or even quote unquote lowbrow literature or something like that. And surprisingly, or at least I thought it was quite surprising, that The Water Margin and Romance of the Three Kingdoms by the way, as well, in its earliest incarnations was circulating in really high elite, quote unquote elite parts of society around the Jiajing court, actually. So the first chapter is about the Marquis of Wuding, Guo Xun, who held an inherited title of the Marquis of Wuding. His family went back to the founding of the Ming dynasty, well, we'll get into that later. So he was born in 1475 and died in 1541. So just to give you an idea of the time frame, we're looking at the beginning, the first quarter of the first half of the 16th century. The second chapter of the book goes into another sort of strange edition from around the same time that was published by an agency, a very high level agency in the Ming dynasty administration called the Censorate, or the Du Cha Yuan. For various reasons I don't have time to go into today, I think that these two, the Guo Xun, the Wuding edition, and the Censorate edition were around the same time, around before 1541. Then something strange happened in the capital. There was a fire in the imperial ancestral hall, and in the wake of that fire, officials were meant to turn in a pro forma resignation claiming responsibility for the fire. You know, I wasn't diligent in my duties and I allowed this fire to happen. And oddly enough, people with connections to the early editions of the water margin were cashiered or ended up in jail and died in the wake of this fire. So it's a very strange kind of turning point in the life and print of the water margin, that the ancestral imperial hall fire marks this turning point. And after that, and that fire was in 1541. And after that is the story that I think most people are more familiar with, when the so-called printing boom in China and in the late Ming, and the rise of commercial print and all of that. And of course, there's no copyright. There's not even an idea of authorship, a strong notion of authorship in these kind of texts. You can take the text and do with whatever you want with it. Publish it with some commentary. Publish it with help explainers for lesser, readers of lesser ability. Publish it with subversive commentary. Publish it with commentary that's so elaborate it outdoes the book itself. I think probably people are more familiar with that side of the story. So I kind of wanted to focus on this part of the story for today. And like I said, if we have time, I kind of approached this as a way to kind of figure out, how do I read this novel, the water margin? What am I supposed to do with it? So I thought I'd go through this process and work out kind of a methodology for doing that. And spoiler alert, it didn't work. It didn't happen. Well, it didn't happen, and now I'm rethinking that maybe it did happen. So that's where, if we have time, I'll get into that. So this time that I call before the fire. As I said, this happened in these are early Jiajing era editions. The first known edition of the water margin is the Wuding edition, published by the Wuding Marquis Guo Xun. And the second is the Ming Censorate, or Du Cha Yuan edition. So I wanted to, so there are his dates. He was the sixth generation descendant of Guo Ying, the original Marquis of Wuding, who, as I said, was fought along with the Zhu Yuanzhang, the founding emperor of the Ming, was granted this inheritable title. Guo Ying, as a dynastic founder, I'm talking about Guo Ying, the ancestor, not Guo Xun. Guo Ying as a dynastic founder generation, member of that generation, he was afforded an entry in the Ming dynasty history, in the Ming Shi. Guo Xun was not. Guo Xun, the descendant, was not. However, Guo Xun was such a notorious character that he got a mention in the Ming Shi. And it had this phrase that I thought was quite nice. It said he was crafty and deceitful and quite involved in books. He was, and then the entry goes on to talk about all of these scandals that he was involved in. And because he was actually a close friend of the emperor, he always seemed to avoid trouble. He always got out of everything until the very end. So I think we probably don't have time to go. If you're interested in those scandals, you can ask me later. So I wanted to talk about the part about this involvement in books that the Ming dynasty, the Ming history does not go into. So obviously, Guo Xun, as a kind of member of a prominent clan, he published compilations of Guo family history documents to kind of play up his name and play up his claim to this marquisate that had fallen into that had discontinued and been picked up again and had all of these kind of discontinuities in it. He published some Tang Dynasty poetry and prose. Some nice classical literature that will probably score you some points with the literati, who you are not as a military family member, you are not part of, but you publish these books and maybe you get in good with them. Some more kind of newer type things, some collections of sanxu. I call it, for lack of a better translation, I call that art songs. And he published The Water Margin and The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, as well as many other things. I don't remember how many, I think, well, I can't remember exactly how many, but these are kind of the general categories that he published in. I wanted to show you this edition of Romance of the Three Kingdoms from 1522. And if you look in a lot of the kind of histories of publishing and things like this, it's often assumed that this is the edition published by the censorate, the Du Chaoyuan. Basically, because it looks nice. It doesn't say censorate or it doesn't say anything about its provenance. But it's obviously very nicely carved. And just aesthetically, it looks like it would be an official publication rather than a commercial publication or something like that. So it's been assumed widely to be the censorate edition. I think maybe it's the Wuding edition. And I think maybe the Wuding and the censorate edition, this is verging on the conspiratorial here. I think the Wuding edition and the censorate edition might very possibly have been the same thing, but that's neither here nor there. This is widely known as the first printed edition. Most of that claim is because of a preface by Xiu Ranzi, dated to 1522, a kind of famous preface where it says, in so many words, it says, the Three Kingdoms, we've already got the history, the official history of the Three Kingdoms, the Sanguo Zhi. Why do we need the Sanguo Zhi Yan Yi? Why do we need the novel version? Isn't it superfluous? It's written in this kind of question answer kind of thing. And the answer is no, it's not, because it's more interesting to read. When you read the Sanguo Zhi, the history, you fall asleep. When you read this one, you don't fall asleep. And then it says, that's great. This is a great book. Why don't we ask our wood carvers to carve it, and then we can disseminate it in all four directions. And great idea, let's do that. So here's the book. So because of that part about this, let's disseminate it in all four directions after sending it to the wood carvers. That is the sort of evidence that people have for thinking that this 1522 edition is the first printed edition. I wanted to show you another one of Guo Xun's publications called Shi Yu and Shi Yi, which I translated as Poetic Rhymes Explicated. And this is a rhyme manual. If you want to write poems, you can use this rhyme manual as an aid. And it was published by Guo Xun, and you can see the preface there talking about what, forgive the quality of the scan there, but that's the preface of an edition held in the I believe the Beijing Tushuguan. And in this preface, it says, Guo Xun, the Marquis of Wuding, is a wonderful person, and he's created order in the area that he's in charge of administrating. And when he's off the clock, he collects these poems and puts them together. And what a cultural person he is for doing so, in so many words. The thing is, Poetic Rhymes Explicated, the Shi Yi part, the part where it explains the meanings of the rhymes, that part is credited to none other than Xiu Ranzi. So here we have a connection between Guo Xun, the Marquis of Wuding, and this person Xiu Ranzi, and the three kingdoms. And I know I'm kind of on less and less firm ground as I go here, inching further and further out onto the thin ice, but it would be assumed, I think, the water margin as well. So there's your connection between Xiu Ranzi and Guo Xun. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the censorate publications. And the censorate, for those of you who don't know, the Du Chayuan is a very high level agency. It's kind of the inheritor of the I think it's called the Yushipai in earlier times. I think censorate is a bad translation in a way, or a misleading. You jump directly to censor, as in censoring texts. It's more like the Bureau of Internal Affairs. The censorate could send investigators out anywhere in the administration, see, check the books, look for corruption or whatever on regular tours and on an ad hoc basis. And it should be added, they could report directly to the emperor if needed. So what would an agency like this, very high level agency, what would they be doing with the water margin? A book about a bunch of bandits, right? So anyway, this is this page that you see here. This is a page from a record of all of official publications from this era, called the imprints old and new, from around the mid 16th century. And at this time, and again, I know I'm going a little bit further and further into the thin ice here, but at this time, around this time, the chief censor was a figure that some of you may know, called Wang Tingxiang. And Wang Tingxiang worked in close cooperation with Guo Xun. So there's kind of this connection there. So what do they have? What do they obviously they print the boss's poetry collection, right? One of the collections of the chief censor's writings. Wang Tingxiang has a collection in there. A couple other censor chiefs of the left and the right have their collections in there, which would seem to make sense. But they also published the water margin, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Sanchu art songs, the collections, and a lot of other things. And it should be said, they published this collection of Guo Xun's family documents that I just mentioned, which seems kind of odd. So when you look at the publications of the censorate and of the Marquis of Wuding, Guo Xun, you'll see an overlap of things that both of them published. And oh no, this blue circle, it got covered up by the closed captioning there. Can I get rid of it? Anyway, you can figure it out, right? You can see that, right? There you go. Thank you. This is this is the Venn diagram of publications by Guo Xun and the censorate. So included in there are the Water Margin, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this art song collection, this Sanchu collection, and the Guo Xun family documents collection. So the question is, and I should add, none of these exist. None of these survive. What do these look like? Well, other than the possible candidate of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms that I just showed you, none of the other ones survive. Which is makes it kind of a challenge to write about them. But you can look at them and look at the circles that are, the social circles that are moving around these, and you can try to kind of figure it out that way. Who is the to put it in a kind of vulgarish modern terminology, what is the market segment that they are targeting? Who's the target reading audience that both Guo and the censorate are looking for? And I think the answer to that, I think we can get pretty specific with that and say that it's people like this guy, Li Kaixian. And so if you remember, I said the fire is in 1541. That edition of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that's 1522. Li Kaixian, his Jin Shi, he did his he passed the palace examination in 1529. So it's right about the same time. And it just happened, and he was cashiered later on in the wake of the fire. He's known for his literary career. He's known for his official career. He's also known for his literary career afterwards. And one of the things he's known for is writing these Sanchu art songs, right? Anyway, he was also an acquaintance of the chief censor, Wang Tingxiang, whom I just mentioned. And he is also one of the earliest known readers of the Water Margin. He wrote a book called Cixue, or Banter on Lyrics, or something like that. And in that book, he makes an offhand reference to, this is written after he'd been sent back to his native place, Zhangqiu in Shandong. And he's reflecting back on his days in the capital. And he writes in there, 崔先、熊过、唐顺之、Wang Shenzhong, and Chen Shu. These are all people who were also the class of 1529 or thereabouts. All of these literati around the court in the capital, his literary coterie there, they all say that the Water Margin is filled with minute details and numerous veins that link up, and that only the Shiji, the records of the grand historian, surpasses this book. So here, and I know this is slightly tenuous because we don't have hard evidence that he's reading that Water Margin, that edition, but this gives us an idea of at least the kind of person for whom these were printed, right? And so why would somebody such as Li Kaixian, a very educated official, and all of these people, why would they be interested in the water margin? Well, first of all, I think this tells you a lot, that they're interested in it because it is all of these things that are woven, it is all of these strands of stories that are woven together. And this continues. He says, moreover, since ancient times, there has never before been a book about a single event, a single uprising or something, told in 20 volumes. They liked it because it's long. They liked it because it's intricate, right? And so what about all the violence in there? What about all of the rampant killing and people going off on complete rampages and killing innocent people and things like that? No, Li Kaixian says that's not the point. One who would fault the water margin for its treacherous banditry and deception knows nothing of the methods for narrating events or of the subtleties of the study of history. It's good writing, right? That's the basic point there is, it's good writing, it's intricate, right? That's why they liked it. That's why they were interested in it. Okay, so I mentioned that the ancestral hall fire was in 1541. And in the wake of that, Guo Xun, in addition to all his printing, if anybody's in history and you're looking for an interesting, somebody should study Guo Xun more than I had time to do, because he was also involved in Taoist ceremonies with the emperor. Some things that I've never had the time to quite work out what exactly he was doing. He was involved in construction. He was involved in all sorts of corrupt activities, in addition to his publishing ventures. So, as I said, he had always been able to get away with doing these things, but in the wake of this fire, maybe the emperor had just had enough of everybody messing around. He ended up in jail, and he ended up dying in jail soon afterward in 1541. Wang Tingxiang, the chief censor, was also exiled and sent back to his native place. Wang Tingxiang, as I mentioned, worked closely with Guo Xun. And Li Kaixian was also exiled back to his native place, where he started writing sanqu and dramas, and he wrote the Record of the Precious Sword, Bao Jian Ji, which is an adaptation of an incident from the water margin. So I like to think of 1541 as being this kind of turning point in the life and print of the water margin. So as I said, the story after the fire is kind of more well known, I think. You can kind of follow the trajectory of the water margin as kind of a trailblazer for vernacular fiction of similar types. As soon as the 1550s, so not too long after this fire, there's a figure named Xiong Damu, who was known for taking historiography, taking all of the official and unofficial historiographies of certain times and things like that, and kind of synthesizing them into interesting narratives. And he did that with the Han and the Tang and different periods like that. And in one of the prefaces to one of those historical works of historical fiction, he says something in there about people in the marketplace are reading Water Margin and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. So maybe we can make more like that. There aren't as many surviving editions from that time. There's no surviving water margin or Three Kingdoms from that time. But later, there's a very I was going to say slightly later in historical terms, slightly later, but in human terms, quite a bit later. The 1590s is the very well-known for-profit publisher Yu Xiangdou. And this is a page from one of his editions with the famous Wu Song fighting the tiger. Yu Xiangdou printed the water margin. He printed Romance of the Three Kingdoms. He printed a lot of these other kind of historical fiction works that trace back to Xiong Damu's time, and he changed them at will, adding commentaries and illustrations and all of these things, targeting his market segment, his target audience, which is still the water margin here, but you can guess that this is quite a different readership than what we had with Li Kaixian and these people in the kind of circles around the Jiajing court. After that, you have commentary editions with the names of famous or infamous literati attached to them, like the famous Li Zhuowu commentary edition of the water margin, where by this time Yu Xiangdou has commentary just trying to help you appreciate the text. Li Zhuowu, this kind of commentary, and it's not the real Li Zhuowu, so that's why the scare quotes there. With the Li Zhuowu commentary editions, you get into the more subversive kind of takes on the water margin, kind of the more provocative takes. And then, of course, you've got the famous Jin Shantan edition, where by this point the commentary is kind of overshadowing the text itself. You almost read the Jin Shantan water margin for the Jin Shantan comments and not so much the story itself. And like I said, this part is much better known than the earlier part with the Marcus of Wuding and the censorate and all of that. So I didn't want to go back into that too much. I just wanted to say that and there's this is the Jin Shantan edition. You can see it's quite nice looking, right? Just from an aesthetic point of view. I didn't want to get too much into the commentaries themselves. I just wanted to go back to this idea that I mentioned was kind of one of my motivating factors for studying this in the first place. This idea of lowbrow versus highbrow or something like that. And to say, the classics or the stuff that's one on the one hand, the literary on the one hand, and the tongsu, the vernacular on the other hand. At some point, we all know, in Chinese studies at least, we all know about, and Japanese studies as well, we all know about the water margin, right? It's a very important book. And you'll often hear this story that I'm telling you now, you'll hear it turned on its head, right? It was low and then it was elevated to the high. The figure that is usually pointed to as the elevation, the elevator of the water margin to the level of the classics is Jin Shantan. And Jin Shantan, he put the water margin in his list of what he called books of genius, 才子书, along with Qu Yuan, the Li Sao and encountering sorrow, and the Zhuangzi, and all of these kind of things. So it's seen as, he made this alternative canon. I just wanted to point out, he wasn't so original in doing this. Li Zhuowu, This is the real Li Zhuowu, so no scare quotes there. Li Zhuowu, in his famous essay on the childlike mind, he said that the water margin is literary, is a classic, because it's a manifestation of the childlike mind. It's not written out of any sort of social climbing reasons or anything like that. It's the unfiltered writing of someone for some reason. That's Li Zhuowu. That's sort of a classic status. But it goes back earlier than that, right? So we're going backwards here. Back in the 1590s, Yu Xiangdou, the commercial printer that I just mentioned, he compared the water margin to the spring and autumns. I mean, he's a for-profit publisher. Of course, he's going to try to pump up the value of his publications. But at the same time, I mean, that he could do that any way he wants, but he chose to do it in these terms. I think that says something. And, you know, let's not pretend like literati weren't self-interested themselves, right? And even before that, as I showed you, Li Kaixian, the earliest known reader of, or among the earliest known readers of the water margin, they were comparing it to the records of the grand historian right off the bat, right? What does that all mean? I don't really know, but I kind of, you know, and I every time I show this, I hope there are no biology majors who will be angry for me, you know, using this as a metaphor. But I started to think of the kind of the DNA of this genre as having kind of two strands, you know, kind of this double helix, where on the one hand, it's informed by kind of literati concerns and all of these sort of things, and a lot of earlier scholarship on the novel, the Ming novel genre talks about how these literati interests of the times kind of percolated into this genre and things like that. But at the same time, we have kind of this adaptability, this endless adaptability that came from the commercial print world, and the way that it could just be reshaped and reshaped over and over again for different target audiences, right? So that is kind of the lessons that I thought that I had taken away from the Outlaws of the Marsh, the water margin. And well, we have a little bit of time, so I'll show you how that kind of fell apart right off the bat. So I thought, you know, my takeaway from working on this project was, when you look at a novel such as The Water Margin, you've really got to put it in its instantiation in print, in a particular community of readers, or however you want to define that, right? I mean, the early editions, the Wuding censored editions, the Wuding editions, they don't exist anymore, but we can kind of recreate that world that they circulated in, and assume that that was probably quite different from, say, a Li Zhuowu commentary edition or something like that. And there's this flexibility that it could do that. So if you ask, you know, my original question, what does this novel mean? You can only answer it in a particular situation, right? So that's what I think. That kind of fell apart right away. With as Dr. Hedberg mentioned, I've been kind of playing around. I actually think this is a really interesting novel, Xi Yang Qi, San Bao Tai Jian, Xi Yang Qi. I worked on this at some point when I was working on the book project. I got really tired of the book project and I put it aside for a while, and I wrote a not so great article on this novel. And then I thought, you know, now that I'm done, what I'm going to do, you know, everybody says the dreaded question, what's your second project going to be, right? I thought, you know, maybe it's time to return to the record of the eunuch Sanbao in the Western Seas. I like to just call it Sanbao, by the way, because Western, it sounds too much like Journey to the West. So if I say Sanbao, that's what I'm talking about. Here's the problem though. Sanbao is quite different from water margin. So how many of my takeaways from the project that I've spent all this time on are going to carry over? Well, for one, Sanbao is relatively stable. There's not this wide history of wildly varying commentaries, right? There are fewer editions. It's not like it's not like the water margin where you can just follow the additions and the evolution. I shouldn't say evolutions, the transformations that it went through. And another thing, and this is what really kind of started attracting me to the Sanbao, is it uses a lot of, I would call it repetitive language. We just saw all of these kind of famous literati from the early 16th century talking about how fine the language of the water margin was, and it's made of all these different strands that come together and all of this stuff. Sanbao, to be honest with you, it will drive you crazy. It will drive you crazy how repetitive it is at times. A few years ago, I read it in a seminar with some students, and they said, is this guy, was he paid by the word or what? What is going on with this book? And it seems to be derivative. If you go back to the famous intellectual Lu Xun, his history of traditional fiction, he talks about how it steals, how it plagiarizes from all of these different sources. There was a time in literary studies where we thought of that as a bad thing. I think nobody cares about that anymore. But I thought, okay, this novel is totally different from the water margin. And again, I'm still sort of working on this. I'm still kind of piecing this together. So if this is a little, immature still, you can help me think through this. I thought, well, no, maybe it's not so different after all. Maybe if I think of that double helix thing and think that the genre has this embedded into its DNA. I know that's not how biology works, but stick with my metaphor, okay? What if this is encoded into the DNA of this sort of thing? And then, what if we just, I'm not saying it's true, I'm just saying, just think, what if we give it the benefit of the doubt, right? What if we say, okay, this repetitive language, maybe it's part of the same sort of thing, it's embedded with all of these other things that exist in the novel genre, right? And the derivative parts, maybe that's on purpose too. So, okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and by the way, I mean, it's a really nice looking book. It has nice illustrations. This is the Sanbao here. I wanted to show you, so the Sanbao, wow, if only there were someone around who could help me work out all the Taoist stuff in here. So there's a crisis. The Buddha is up in Tushita heaven or wherever he is. And he's, hanging out with all of the bodhisattvas and everyone. And they say, is there anything to report from the world of humans? And somebody comes up and says, yes, there's a crisis. The Taoists are coming and they're going to outlaw Buddhism, and it's going to be a crisis of our faith. So they decide that they're going to send down the Randangufo, the Dipankara Buddha, and he's going to incarnate, and he's going to save the world from those nasty celestial masters who are going to poison the faith. So it begins the novel. If you've read Journey to the West, it's quite like Journey to the West, where the first few chapters are the almost like a standalone story of the rise of the Monkey King. This is the rise of a monk named Jin Bifeng, who is going to save Buddhism in the world. So the novel has this Buddhist framework. And I'm just saying that, let's give it the benefit of the doubt and think that this is done on purpose. Yeah. So I want to show you how this framework goes. So the school, it starts out with, just like Journey to the West, this kind of big overview of the history of the cosmos and everything before narrowing down to human beings. And the human beings had 9 schools, it says. And among the 9 schools, there are 3 main ones. And this is written in a very funny way. It's I think it's 三个大管家 or something like that. It's very colloquial sounding, right? The first is Confucianism, the second is Buddhism, and the third is Taoism, right? And it's going to go and it's going to tell you what, in case you don't know, what Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism are. Which one is, fill in the blank? Confucianism. It's that, fill in the blank, Confucius, who's worshipped in, fill in the blank, Confucian temples across the realm nowadays. What kind of background did this Confucius have? It's said that Confucius was born in Xue village, Chongping Township, blah, 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 right? Okay, it goes on. The next one is Buddhism. Do you want to guess? Then tell, which one is Buddhism? It's that Buddha who's worshipped in Buddhist temples across the realm nowadays. What kind of background did this Buddha have? Originally, this Buddha was called Shakyamuni, blah, 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 blah. Are you ready? It's going to be Taoism. Do I need to go to the next slide, or can you guess it? Then tell, which one is Taoism? Is it driving you crazy yet? It's that highest elder lord who's worshipped in Taoist temples across the realm nowadays. What kind of background did this highest elder lord have? Blah, 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 right? So it gives this kind of winding and digressive, I wanted to call it Mad Libs. If Mad Libs, like when you're a kid, it says like fill in the noun or things like that. I couldn't, I don't want to write an academic article about Mad Libs, so I called it a phrasal template. I think that sounds more academic, right? It's a phrase, it's a template of a phrase that you fill in the blank, right? And this is just a good example. This occurs all throughout the novel. I like to include this one here because it's in chapter 1. So anyway, it establishes this kind of Buddhist framework, and it says, and then it gives you this big overview about the 3 big bosses of the 9 schools of thought, and then it zooms in on Buddhism. Only the Buddha Tathagata resides at Vulture Peak in the Western Heavens, blah, 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 blah. And from there, as I just said, it focuses on sending the Dipankara Buddha down to earth to save Buddhism. In the first 8 chapters, the Dipankara Buddha takes the form of the monk Jin Bifeng. He goes down to Hangzhou and finds a suitable family to be reborn in, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So, as I said, what do the lessons of the bandits, of the outlaws of the marsh have for us when we're reading a book that's so differently? And again, these are my kind of tentative ways to comfort myself and tell me that I haven't wasted all this time. No, I think I think I'm going to try to force a conclusion there and say that maybe we can kind of assume that sort of double helix that was kind of injected into the DNA of the genre exists in the Sanbao as well. So maybe we can assume that this isn't just, assume for the initial approach. We can assume that this is done on purpose, right? These phrasal templates, this repetitive language is done for effect. And maybe, just maybe, this repetitive language and these kind of phrasal templates that are found all throughout the novel is related to this kind of Buddhist framework. This kind of starting out in the heavens with the Buddha and his lecture, and then moving down to the earth and Hangzhou, and then from Hangzhou to the Western seas of the title. So I don't know, I think, we can just at least, if nothing else, take the framing of the novel seriously. So anyway, I will leave it there. And we've entered the shameless self-promotion area, and there you go. Well, it's not shameless self-promotion because it's free. You can download it. So I think if you want to buy a hard copy, I think there's a code there. I needed a picture and I had the code. So you can scan that and it will take you to the page to download a PDF or an EPUB of it. And then, oh, thank you. And then if you want to ask the book questions, I made an AI chatbot, and it's called Bandit Helper, and you can ask the book questions. Literally, I mean, and if you do that, tell me if it's. I've played with it. It works surprisingly well. Not always, but most of the time. Okay, so that's all I had to say. Thank you.
The chatbot gonna handle the Q&A or?
Yeah, actually, I did use it while I was writing the talk.
Well, with that, let's indeed open things up to Q&A. Got a lot of questions. Professor Tillman, would you like to start us off?
Apologies for arriving around 10 minutes late.
Oh, no problem.
So I might have missed you talking about this, but I'm curious. Back when I was in graduate school, and the Cultural Revolution era, there was a lot of controversy in China, and picked up by Western scholarship also about the water margin. And there's been such a radical shift in cultural policy, in views of different dynasties and what Chinese culture is, etc. Especially under Xi Jinping. Has the water margin, how has the water margin fared in this sort of Xi Jinping sort of contortion of Chinese tradition and the kind of issues that the Maoists dealt with in the Cultural Revolution? And to those kinds of sort of political issues, is any of that reflected back into this otherwise sort of print and audience, etc. Focus? Is the political governmental, etc. issues of the late 20th, early 21st century reflected back in there as an additional sort of factor?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will probably mess this up. But at one time I thought about writing on this, and I didn't do it because I think someone else has it covered. But there was the anti-water margin campaign, right? And Chairman Mao. Well, you've got the long version of the water margin, where in chapter 70 they decide they're going to capitulate to the authorities, right? And then they sell out. If you like the bandits, then they sell out, right? This is a problem, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but didn't Chairman Mao say? I remember when I was young, I read an edition where it stopped when they all come together in chapter 70, and that they never gave in to the authorities. So there's this kind of controversy around the Cultural Revolution era. Mao wanted the 70 chapter version back in print, so they reprinted the Jin Shentan edition with a nice thing by Mao at the beginning, where he says, what is it? 水浒传的好就在头想，让我们what is it? Something about 修正主义者 看修正主义者的真面目 or something like that. Was it revisionist? You know, through the capitulation of Song Jiang and these guys, we can see the real the face of the capitalist roaders and the capitulationists. I'm probably getting my CCP jargon wrong, but I remember it's something like that, and I got a big kick out of maybe Xiao Qiao knows the edition I'm talking about, right? With the Mao at the beginning of the, you don't know that one? Okay. But anyway, yeah, so I think at that time there was this not my field, but it seems like there was a controversy about everything at that time, right? You know, what is it? Overthrow Confucius and Ming or you know something. The water margin, and I think Will, do you know, wasn't one of the characters like Song Jiang was read as being like Deng Xiaoping or something like that, or I don't know. Something like that. It was like somebody was bad and they were like a bad character, and so we can read, you know. Anyway, there was that. I know that there was that kind of controversy in the Cultural Revolution era, and then Xi Jinping. That's such a good question. I don't know how much I can read into this, but and I mentioned it in the book actually in chapter in 2010 or so, there was a so I guess that's not quite the high Jinping or Xi Jinping era yet, but you know, we're heading that direction. There was a big TV drama adaptation of the water margin, and I think it's just called 新水浒传. And I remember there's a scene, there's an incident in the water margin that I think is really interesting, where Song Jiang, of course, kills someone and goes on the run, right? Very famous episode. And because of his connections in the Jianghu, in the martial arts underworld, the people who are sent out from the Yamen to catch him, they let him slip through, right? And I think that's a very telling incident for commentators. You know, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Li Zhuowu, the kind of provocative commentary says this is great, and this is, you know, how you know that these guys are real. They won't let the law oppress them. They're subject to their own higher law or something. Anyway, so the television version of this, Song Jiang, they come to where Song Jiang is hiding, and it's totally different. Song Jiang, and in my subjective opinion, it kind of ruins it. Like Song Jiang is like, I'm righteous and good, and so I'm going to go along with you. You know, I'm going to turn myself, take me back to the Yamen, and I'm going to go plead my case or something like that. So I don't know how much politics we can read into that. Whether, you know, we kind of want to defang the water margin in the 2010s. In the more modern era, or if that just goes back to kind of the more straightforward ways of reading, which go back to, you know, Xiangzhou, people like that. I really don't know, but that would be my guess, because, you know, again, you could all along you could read it any way you want and spin it any way you want. So I hope that answers.
So Ming.
Yeah, thank you for this great talk. And I really like the notion of a DNA of yeah, because it reminds me of like 16th, 17th century when we get to that like messy commercial printing world, right? All these really, really lengthy works, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, 封神演义, and then all those like 东游, 西游, like 北游记,
Right.
and all of those. And they're all like so full of details.
Yeah.
And try to like cover all the ground. But then this was also the time when we had all those like daily encyclopedias and
Right.
stuff, right? So I wonder if like the reading of these novels, is that supposed to be like you're really sitting down and reading for the story, or it's just the kind of overwhelming details that you you sit down, do a immersive session, and then you leave it. You don't know when you come back. I wonder, yeah, if that's something that was built in there in the sense of like the reading habit and
Yeah.
reading expectations.
Yeah, and of course, people like Robert Hagel and people like that have written about this in the past, but I just imagine like if you are the sort of audience that somebody like Yu Shengdou is targeting, you probably know the story water margin inside and out already, right? So, but maybe you want to pull the book off the shelf and flip through it and read it like a comic book by looking at the pictures or revisit certain events or something like that. And I always have this sneaking suspicion that I can't prove that people would read this sort of thing in kind of sets of chapters or something anyway. I think maybe we're the strange ones who think that it's some sort of literary classic and we have to start in chapter 1 and go all the way to, like these people who can jump into a soap opera or something in episode 37 and kind of figure out backwards what's going on. I think that's a very common thing. And, of course, Ming has written about, drama miscellanies and people flipping through and treating it like a magazine. The funny thing is now when I mention that to undergraduate students, they don't really know what I mean by it's a magazine. They're like, is that like scrolling a feed or something? But anyway, yeah, you can kind of flip through it. Yeah. I think one of the kind of keys to that and to kind of undermine my own position here is I'm sort of talking about these books that have sort of pretensions to, I didn't mention, but Journey to the Western Seas, it has 100 chapters. It's kind of organized in the same way as Journey to the West. It's quite long and all of this. I mean, what happens if you take a book that has like 55 chapters, like Chanzhen Yishu or something like that. So that's kind of another, the ever formulating second project. Who's first? Yeah. Yes. And then.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, because you just mentioned the 2011 version TV drama.
Yeah,
version. It's very interesting, and it reminds me of the 1998 version directed by the CCTV, the China Central Television. So are you also interested in a comparative study of the different versions, like during the one during the jump period, the 2011 one during the whole period, and the more recent ones during the Xi periods. And I think that would be interesting, like just Professor Liang So did research on the global white snake. Yeah, another question maybe, I like to diverge a little bit. So what's your favorite hero in this thing?
First of all, that sounds like a great comparative project, and it's all yours if you want to do it. Let me know how it goes, because for one thing, the things like the water margin, they're so long in the first place, and then watch all the adaptations. It takes a lot of time. I want to get out of the water margin, but I would love to hear if anybody has any conclusions about that, other than I was in Taiwan at Zhongyan Yuan at the time they were airing that, so I kind of happened upon it. I didn't make a very detailed study of all of those different. Nowadays, when we talk about the water margin, Three Kingdoms, all of that, especially with undergraduate students, they will know all of these adaptations. The nice thing to me is like that's the whole thing. It's always been the whole thing it's an ongoing phenomenon from those times. And for my favorite person, I think I'd have to say Li Gui. And I wrote about there's a really interesting passage in the novel where Li Gui meets his doppelganger called Li Gui. That was one of my favorite parts, so I'm gonna have to go with Li Gui. Good answer.
Oh, did you have a question? Oh, yeah. Or I said there was a question over here.
It was my hand.
Yeah, please, okay, just want to make sure.
Just a very quick one, the Mad Libs.
Oh, yeah.
And you. said-
Phrasal templates.
Yeah, phrasal templates. We're all adults now.
Yeah, that's right.
Repetition is also sometimes a sign of orality.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
And that actually, that sort of orality factor may happen at different, various registers, not just the popular
Right.
registers, just can happen. Even Shangshu has certain level of orality based repetition as well.
Yeah.
And so if we might consider it in the sense that there is this factor of the sound factor of it
Mhm.
in the text, and why would that actually be found in fiction or novels, so to speak? So perhaps that would give us some idea that how fiction actually can evolve.
Yeah.
From certain level of orality and visuality combined together, and then over time, becoming more and more visual text than actual oral text. Because when we see Yu Xiangdo's printing, it's really loud and
You sound those.
yeah,
Like this?
there's a lot of text, and it's not really for sounding. It's probably more for viewing in a way. So
Or
that's-
some combination of both.
Right, both, and then you switch the register and the layout to sort of like, sounding out parts,
Yeah.
and there's just reading part, the story parts, right?
And there's something, you can ask the AI chatbot. I don't remember that offhand, but it's in the book where it talks about the preface to the Yu Xiangdo edition. And he's talking about in there how great his edition is versus the other ones on the market. And one of the things I think is really interesting in there is he mentions the poems. He says, some of the other editions out there, they took the poems out, so you can't get together with your friends and recite them out loud. I thought, maybe that's what you do on Saturday night. You get together with your friends and have some drinks and pull out your copy of the Shui Hu Zhuan and read the poems out loud, right? I mean, of course, I can't prove that, but there is that kind of mention, yeah, I think it's worth it to think about the uses of the text. But the orality thing is really funny to me because it seems that the more literary, something like you mentioned Shangshu, right? Or something like that, you can recite those, right?
Right.
And you can memorize them. And you can, like in the movie, The Butterfly Lovers, I always remember they're in the schoolhouse and they're going, Da Xue Zhi Dao. It's like, right? You could probably do that with the Heart Sutra. You could do that with the Da Xue or the Zhongyong or something. You can't do that with water margin, right?
Right.
So, Hua Shuo, nobody's gonna be able to do the whole thing, right? So which one is really oral and which one is really written?
Right, I think that is actually a really interesting point to think about. We simply assume, thinking from our point of view, from modern point of view, heavily visual, and then think that there has to be some kind of orality based text, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Anything can be oralized, and anything can be actually enjoyed being sounded out.
Yeah, and I think people have even to this day, despite all the scholarship telling people otherwise, people get thrown off by all of the things in the text of vernacular fiction where it says Hua Shuo, or it says here goes our story, or here the story splits into two or something like that, and they get sucked into this idea of like an oral storyteller, where well, I don't think, I think many decades ago, people just assumed that somebody sat in a tea house and copied down what the storyteller was saying, and that's why it says Hua Shuo and all this kind of stuff. But it's a very particular, and I would say written rhetoric that mimics some aspects.
Right,
of-
it's a signal, basically. It's a-
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, and to get a little bit ahead of myself with the Sanbao stuff. And this is kind of where I'm going with this, and I'm not quite there yet, but I feel like this is almost like a satire of those
Yeah.
techniques, right? Where it's just hitting you over the head with how formulaic it is.
That's exactly how, what I was sort of like thinking is that
Yeah,
this guy's making fun of based on the repetitive
exactly.
and simplified everything. So that way, and how, you know, each of the three teachings basically fundamentally just repeating the same thing just as each other.
And there's another scene in the novel that I wanted to use, but it's too complicated, where a character becomes invisible. He has some magic feather that makes him invisible. And he's a spy. And he goes and he becomes invisible, he appears, he becomes invisible, he tries to freak out everybody in the marketplace. And then he sets himself up as a fortune teller, because he's got this kind of plan. But anyway, five, I forget if it's 4 or 5, people come up to have their fortunes told. And he says, give me a character. And then the person will say, yen. And then he'll say, what are you asking about? And the character will say, I'm asking about marriage. And then he'll make this kind of statement. And the statement is always a reference to a text, right? So there's this play of like orality, and it's always something where he's misreading a character, or, you know, it's a joke. Yeah, it's a conscious joke playing on the orality versus textual qualities. I think, yeah, I wish I could remember the joke off the top of my head, but something like that.
Maybe time for one more question.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the talk. My question is about the audience. So you mentioned that it is a change of audience from elite to the popular mass, and there's a very specific audience that you lifted out, Li Kaixian. So
Yeah.
I wonder, what are the sources or evidence that help you establish this kind of conclusion? And the reason why I'm asking is that I'm working on illustrations of prints, like this kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
So that kind of question I get asked a lot when I present.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really frustrating one, because there's just not enough surviving evidence, right? And you can assume, and again, I know I'm going back out, this is the thin ice over here. I keep going back out onto the thin ice over here when I say these kind of things, but somebody like Li Kaixian and his friends, they don't need an edition that looks like this, right? They don't need the pictures, and again, I'm just speculating, but they probably think, oh, Sue, right? You know, and it's kind of carved a little sloppy, and it's got kind of very pedestrian sort of commentary at the top. So unfortunately, these editions, we don't know what they look like, but I assume that they would look like something like this. Probably no commentary, probably no illustrations. Maybe if they did have illustrations, they'd be at the front of the book. I don't have a slide, but you know, the Rongyutang edition with the Li Zhuowu commentary from around 1610. It has very beautiful illustrations at the beginning of the chapter. It's not on each page like that, right? And they're much nicer carved than the Wusong Dahu that I just showed you. I mean, I really wish that, you know, that I could go back in time and see what exactly those editions looked like, but I can only speculate. And I can defend myself for speculating, because I think overall, all of this kind of circumstantial evidence, when you put it together, I think it shows you, I think it holds up. You know, it might not win a criminal trial, but it would convince a jury in a civil trial, all of this kind of circumstantial evidence around Li Kai-shian.
Right, so did Li Kai-shian left some sort of journal or comment?
Yes. That's the Ci Xue.
I mean, like about the water margin. But
That, unfortunately, that's all he says about the water margin in Ci Xue, these few lines here. It's like, what, like 3 or 4 sentences. But, again, if I can speculate, he did write Bao Jian Ji. And in a way, Record of the Precious Sword. And in a way, Record of the Precious Sword is it's an incident from the water margin redone in a different way, where the outlaw person gets his revenge on Gao Qiu and the bad guys, right? So again, to speculate, it seems like Li Kai-shian is he wants the power of he's not playing around and pretending it's just the subtlety of the study of history. He wants the power of the treacherous banditry and deception and the violence, and he wishes he could wreak revenge from his exile.
thank you, that's great. And then
Okay, thanks.
Well, with that, I think we're right at about time, so let's thank Professor Gregory. Thank you all very much for coming. We'll have our next Global Asia talk in
Next Friday.
next Friday, 1 week. Okay. So thanks all for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, I sent them. This one is.